And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight. In the nation's capital, Brooke Jeffrey, political scientist at Concordia University and author of Divided Loyalties, the Liberal Party of Canada, 1984 to 2008. And there's Jeffrey Simpson as well, national affairs columnist with the Globe and Mail. And here in studio, Carolyn Bennett, the re-elected Liberal MP for St. Paul's, Martha Hall Finley, the just-defeated Liberal MP for Willowdale, and John Duffy, Liberal advisor and principal at Strategy Corp. Good to have everybody here in the studio and in our studio in Ottawa. Okay, Martha, you and me first. You ready? How you doing?
It's been tough. It's tough when volunteers come in, and I say that we have. I've taken a break from going to help pull out signs and clean up the campaign office. It is tough when volunteers come in, and I'm really proud of the fact that we do have so many great volunteers who are still coming in to help after the fact. You know, something good's happened when they come in after you lose.
Are you in a state of shock, though?
So we have a great team. It's tough when volunteers come in and start crying. And it's hard to keep your composure, but there's nothing we could have done differently. We ran a great campaign. As I said, we've had a great team, far better than ever we've seen before.
How many doors did you knock on?
Oh God, thousands. How can you?
Okay.
You know.
Did you pick up any inkling in the knocking on those thousands of doors that what transpired Monday night was going to happen?
Into the last week, no. But in the last week, we did sense a lot more. I'm not sure, a lot more undecided, and that's the opposite of a normal campaign. Normally, by the last week of a campaign, people have pretty much decided where they're going to go. I think people were really, there's no question in Willowdale, there was an upsurge of the NDP, like everywhere, and then there was a reaction. It's a relatively, you know, economically conservative riding, and there was definitely a reaction to all of the publicity about this orange surge. There was very much an element of, uh-oh, we have to stop the NDP. So it was a very weird feeling. Very positive for us, for me personally, very positive, but there's not much you can do when you hit a wave like this.
Right. Carolyn Bennett, we're in your riding right now, actually. When you were door knocking, did you pick up any signs that what transpired was going to transpire?
Not as much door knocking, but just seeing sometimes on the social media the NDP sort of triumphalism and in what they saw in terms of momentum, which was the NDP candidate in my riding, and so
Mole. His last name was Mole.
William Mole. So it was a little bit worrying that way. I think that even from the beginning that we watched a lot of volunteers because of the new consolidated database for Liberals, that a lot of people, our volunteers at the beginning, had been poached to other campaigns, and that Carolyn will be fine, come and help us in other ridings. And so we were fighting back against that. But also the fact that St. Paul's has a 30% sort of core Tory base that we had to, you know, painstakingly explain to people that I won't be fine unless if you feel you have the luxury of voting NDP, we could be in trouble. And so it was a little bit tough that way.
John, when did you have a sense that you were going to lose half your seats that night?
Well, one of the nice things about not being a party that's contending for power is you can be a little more relaxed in your opinions. I think, I'll be honest, a lot of us who pay attention to the strategy of these things, and I wasn't a participant in this, had a pretty dark feeling about the wisdom of launching this election in the first place. You know, people were saying, well, it won't get better, you know, this is our time to do it, but I would sometimes say, listen, they don't launch space shuttles into hurricanes. They just don't. There may not be a better time to do it, but they just don't do that. There was a lot of foreboding among people who pay close attention to this stuff. It turned out, unfortunately, to be true. I think the point at which foreboding turned into a real, genuine concern that the outcome was becoming really hard to avoid had to do with the period immediately after the English language debate as the NDP surge came on. Campaigns can pivot. They are capable of turning around large wave dynamics. We did it in 2004. It wasn't a pretty operation, but we did it. I've seen Mr. Chrétien's campaign deflect negative wave dynamics that were happening really well. I've seen successful attempts to divert something from happening that only come back to bite you later, like with Mr. Peterson in 1990 when he beat down a Tory surge only to have it come up as NDP. It can be done. You can beat back waves, but the Liberal Party wasn't doing the things that you have to do to beat back waves. Yeah. And it's at that point that many people who pay close attention to the strategy on this said this is not going to go very well at all.
Jeffrey Simpson, let me get you to sort of pick up on what you've been writing in your columns since election night, and that is that I guess this notion that you can't really solely place this loss on the shoulders of Michael Ignatieff. This thing was a long time in coming, and I wonder if you could pick up on that and tell us what you meant by that.
Well, I was trying to argue that parties are not immutable. Parties disappear. Parties outlive their usefulness. Parties are no longer a reflection of certain currents in the country, be they social, demographic, economic. And I was referring to the disappearance of the British Liberal Party after the First World War. If you know a little bit about American politics, you know in the 19th century, one of the great parties was the Whig Party with people like Henry Clay. It disappeared. Even in our own country, I think of the Conservatives. They've changed their name. They've changed their pitch many times since Sir John A. Macdonald's time. So there's nothing to suggest that the Liberal Party's future is preordained as a strong national party. Many of the great issues that the Liberal Party dealt with successfully in the 20th century up to the end of Pierre Trudeau are less relevant today than they were then, or at least other parties have poached the territory and seem to be talking about those issues and reflecting them, at least at the moment. Since we're in Ontario, Steve, let me just say that since I got to Ottawa half a century ago, I've watched the Liberal Party in this province in slow decline. When I first got here, there was what I call the Red Crescent that ran from Kenora through northern Ontario and down the Ottawa Valley to Cornwall. The Liberals had almost all those seats. Now they have almost none of them. What's really shocking is in Franco, Ontario, which used to be among the core areas for the Liberal Party, with 5 or 6 seats where the Franco-Canadian, Franco-Ontarian vote was important, they only hold 1 of those seats anymore. Think of the great industrial cities of Ontario. When I first got to Ottawa, the Liberals owned Windsor with Herb Gray, and before that, Paul Martin, Eugene Whalen. They owned Hamilton with John Munro and then Sheila Copps. They were the dominant party in Welland and St. Catharines, Niagara Peninsula, Kitchener, London. They're gone in most of those areas now. So it's not just metropolitan Toronto. People are focusing correctly on the impressive gains that the Conservatives made in the 905 areas and in the so-called ethnic communities of the Chinese, Sikhs, and South Indians. That's very impressive, and that's another part of the Liberal coalition in Ontario that's now frittered away. But think of those other parts of the province and those other areas of the Liberal coalition in Ontario that used to be so fundamental. And I haven't even mentioned Quebec. The Liberals haven't been the majority party in Quebec since Pierre Trudeau left, and that was how many years ago? Almost 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Brooke, before I get you in here, I want to put some numbers up here because the Liberal Party actually has been here before. And to that end, let's look at some of the statistics from previous elections. There have been 17 national elections between 1958 and 2008. The average percentage of the total votes cast for the Liberals was 37.6%. The highest percentage of votes was Trudeau-mania, 47.5% in 1968. The lowest percentage of votes before this one was Stéphane Dion, 2008, with just over 26% of the total votes cast. This one, everybody said it couldn't go lower than last time, but it did. 18.9% of the total votes cast. Now, Brooke, if you start at 1993, which was Mr. Chrétien's first win, the Liberal share of the total vote has gone down each time. 93, 97, 2000, 04, 06, 08, and now 11. That line is inexorably going in one direction. And in your book, which I read and which I very much enjoyed, one of the things you suggest is that this party has yet to get over the cleavages that were created over the Meech Lake Constitutional Accord back in 1990. Just advance that theory, if you would, and then we'll go from there.
Well, yes, it wasn't what I was expecting to talk about to start with, but I'm happy to do that.
Roll with it, Brooke, roll with it.
Yes. Well, I was trying to be more optimistic, and here we are on a downer right off the bat. But yeah, there's no question that the difficulties that the party encountered under John Turner, who, and for future reference, I point out was elected as an obvious winner by a party that had no idea what he really thought about things, and after the fact, they discover he liked Meech Lake and they didn't, you know. The crisis that caused in the party, the new cleavage along what I call the Federalist axis, which pretty much destroyed them in the '88 election. You know, public dissent in the natural governing party was quite unheard of. Getting rid of a leader the way that Turner left after '88 and so on. This has not really been resolved. When Mr. Chrétien took over, it was clear that he followed the original Trudeau version of reality in terms of the Constitution, nation building, and the pan-Canadian vision. And he advanced that in a number of ways through social programs, through the Clarity Act, and so on. But underlying that, there was still, even in power, the position of Mr. Martin, who was the natural heir of Mr. Turner, that actually decentralization and asymmetrical federalism were the way to go. And when you're in power, you have carrots and sticks and so on. And certainly if you're in the cabinet, you're not going to disagree with the boss. But eventually we saw what we saw. We saw Mr. Chrétien deposed in a palace coup. We saw Mr. Martin take over in a very short order. We saw comments about the joys of asymmetrical federalism and, you know, the recruitment of people like Jean Lapierre, the addition of former Bloc members into the party and so on. So clearly, this was a different approach to Canada, to federalism, and it went against the grain of the traditional liberal approach, which equated Canadian values and liberal values that Canadians had come to expect. Since then, we've had a quick succession of leaders, none of whom have ever got a handle on this. And in fact, of course, Mr. Ignatieff actually supported Quebec as a nation idea during his leadership campaign, which in the end he didn't win. And as a result, you have the Liberals at the present time afraid to move on a number of fronts. They're afraid to move on the left-right spectrum, as Jeffrey Simpson has indicated in several columns. They're afraid they've let Mr. Harper set the parameters on the economy. They don't want to talk about raising taxes. They don't want to talk about expenditure cuts and so on. But on the federalist axis, they've also been very, very timid. And as a result, they haven't rebuilt that core in Quebec. Now, Mr. Chrétien was certainly making progress in each election. He did get more seats in Quebec, but with Mr. Martin's approach, the sponsorship scandal and so on, that all fell apart, and there's been nothing done to address that in all the time that they've been waiting for this election.
Okay, our guests in Ottawa have given us a real good history lesson there on some of the issues that have led. Now, the reason I wanted to do that was because, you know, the temptation the day after the election is to say it's all that leader's fault. And I think the point that these two guys are making in Ottawa is this has been decades in the works. And Martha, you know, how is this party going to figure out whether it's kind of in the pro or anti-Meach camp? Or is it part of that center-left coalition with the NDP, or is it more of its traditional, you know, we had a lot of friends on Bay Street once upon a time too? Lots to figure out.
Well, with all respect to Brooke, because I think what she's described is absolutely bang on, but the future of the Liberal Party is not going to go anywhere if we go back and start talking about Meach again. We have to move forward. But I absolutely agree with the question of timidity. The Liberal Party will go nowhere if we do not stop trying to be everything to everybody. We are not, and part of the challenge is that we continue to use this language of left and right. Those words don't apply anymore. I know personally I am regarded as, and am very much, of that economically oriented, market-oriented fiscal life in terms of economics. Right. But in terms of other social issues, you know, a lot of pretty far in the other direction. And so I have no place on a left-right spectrum. I feel very strongly, and it was originally our colleague Scott Bryson who used the language, not left, not right, but going forward. We have to get away from this old terminology of left and right, and we have to, as a Liberal Party, stop feeling as though we need to appeal to a broad, I appreciate the big red tent, but we have to have the guts to say we're not going to represent absolutely everybody, and we have to lose the timidity and be able to say, no, we actually do stand for economic responsibility, fiscal prudence. We get that. People across this country recognize the importance of competition, recognize the importance of hard work, but we also want to make sure that whatever we do with the prosperity that we gain from that, we use for good purpose.
Let me get John and Carolyn on that too.
Well, I don't disagree with Martha about her points of departure. Nor about Brooke. That issue was never resolved. And I, you know, bear a share of responsibility in some of the experimentation with asymmetricality that went on. We saw it as a response to the reality that our core franchise in Quebec largely disappeared on election night in 1984. I really go to Jeff's point about the pieces of the Liberal Party that have fallen away over the years. In the 60s, we lost the prairies. In the 70s, we lost big business. I think in the 60s, we lost the unions as well. Which starts to put those industrial centers slowly over time into play. In the 80s, we lost French Canada. We lost Francophone Quebec.
Don't forget the West.
The West was already gone in my book. But, you know, and it goes on. Mr. Chrétien and latterly Mr. Martin, I think, tried to re-erect the party as the Party of Ontario, which was something that was quite possible in the vote-splitting environment we had. And I think
Meaning,
slowly,
just to explain, just when there were two
when you had a
conservative
divided
parties.
right, particularly in Ontario, you were able to win in almost every seat in the province, which was, no one has ever tried to build an Ontario-based national coalition. It's not a likely project in Canadian political history, and it turned out not to be durable for the Liberals as well. The thing that's so shattering about Monday night is that one of the pillars we were seeking to erect ourselves over the long term for, which was multicultural Canada, fell away as well. I don't know who adheres to the Liberal Party anymore as a class of people. The only people I know who do are people who are either in it so long that they, love it and they're used to its culture, and I certainly count myself as one of them, and certainly the power brokers are all going to go. I mean, if there were any left in the Liberal politics, they are not going to waste their time in a third party in an existential crisis. The last one, I think, turned out the lights of their franchise sometime on Tuesday morning. So what's left? Well, what's left is presumably the idea that you can construct what Martha's talking about, which is a party that's built around some ideas and principles. That's a very different Liberal Party. The Liberal Party I came into was one where you had some idea people and they rubbed shoulders with power brokers. But a lot of the ideas came from other parties, the NDP, say, or the Reform Party laterally. Do the Liberals really want to be? In order to survive, I think the Liberals will have to, at least for a time, be a party of ideas who are prepared to have their ideas stolen by other parties, get no reward for it, never get appointed to anything, and be in politics for all the right reasons. That is a really painful and rocky vocation. It's like becoming a Trappist monk for a lot of people who are really used to the medieval papacy as their idea of religious service. It's going to be interesting and a major cultural change, but I hope we can do it.
Brother Simpson is smiling, but he's going to have to wait to comment because I want to hear from Carolyn first.
Well, I think that if you actually go back to the Liberal Constitution and the values, that there are lots of people who subscribe to those values, and it is values that aren't wedded in a left or a right ideology. It's a set of values that is supposed to get value for money and supposed to have a compassionate approach to community and looking after one another. And so all across this country, there are people who subscribe to those values and don't want to be stuck in the other two ideologies and work very hard. I mean, Liberals in Alberta are some of the most amazing people I have met in my life. Some of them did come from Quebec, and some of them have come from other places. But it's an energy that is really impressive and worth fighting for. So I think that we do need to have the wherewithal to go forward. This first past the post system has always upset Liberals in Alberta, where they could get 20% of the vote, 18% of the vote, even 11% of the vote, and have no seats. And I think we're also going to see a renewal of an interest in alternative vote, other kinds of voting, so that people get a voice. It's not just the Green Party who is upset about the fact that people can be shut out of the House of Commons because they ascribe to the not this week the natural governing party.
But you know what? You're the only Liberal. I think I can say this on solid footing. I think you're the only Liberal who has championed kind of looking at different alternatives for how we vote.
Oh no,
some
of us are very strong proponents of some form of proportional representation.
There is quite a bubbling little subculture of democratic reform.
There never was when you guys were winning.
Oh no,
we haven't been winning lately.
I've been saying this for years, actually. So has Carolyn.
It's a small number.
It's a small number.
But the Alberta Liberals, the Saskatchewan Liberals, I mean, this is something that really will come out of places where they've been out without a voice for too long. And the alternative vote system, I think a lot of people, even the emails this since Monday night, are saying, that in Toronto itself, the Liberals would have won all the seats except maybe one in an alternative vote system without even moving to the bigger kind of proportional representation.
Jeff Simpson wants in. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
No, I don't want in. I just we got diverted into alternative votes and PR, which they're voting about in Britain today. Generally speaking, when I hear that debate, it's always from parties that are quite marginal. So when the Liberals start raising it, that's further confirmation of their marginality.
Well,
we didn't hear much about it when they
some of us have been saying it for a long time.
Go ahead, finish the thought, Jeffrey.
But it was never the officials' party position, and most Liberals never wanted to talk about it because they benefited from the existing system. Now that the Liberals are in the third part, anyway, the point I wanted to make in a more generic way is that Brooke was talking about Meech Lake and talking about the role of the federal government and federal-provincial relations. Maybe that's not very important for Canadians anymore. The principal advantage of the Liberal Party over the other party for most of the last century was that it was the sturdiest bridge between Francophone Quebecers and the rest of the country. But something fundamentally has changed, which is that although people in the rest of the country obviously don't want the country to break up, they're not prepared to do very much to keep it together anymore if it comes to that. That's a fundamental difference from 30 years ago. So the Liberal Party, which offered that sturdy bridge, is now really, if that's indeed what they're going to try to continue to offer, offering something that a whole bunch of people in the rest of the country aren't as passionately committed to. They love Canada. They don't want Canada to break up, but they're not looking for a political party to kind of keep Quebec in the Federation if Quebec wants to leave, the way Mr. Trudeau portrayed himself. Think about some other big issues, for example, that we can't have a discussion about that the Liberals haven't participated much in, and that's healthcare, which the Liberals contributed to. I was smiling, you caught me smiling when I heard John Duffy, because when I was in the United Kingdom as a correspondent, the Liberal Party existed in the United Kingdom, and it existed for exactly the reason that John mentioned. It was a party that didn't have very many seats in the House of Commons, but it had a bunch of interesting, rather eccentric people from the Celtic fringes and from some of the urban ridings of the South who would throw up these ideas which were outside the mainstream, if I can put it that way. They were considered lovable sort of heretics, if I can put it that way. And today in Britain, where there's a Liberal Democratic Party, they're the third party, and they're the party that threw up interesting ideas, but which actually never were going to form the majority government in the House of Commons. And so when I was smiling about John, I thought to myself, there are a lot of smart, clever Liberals. But it may well be that the fate for these smart, clever Liberals is to be like the British Liberals who throw up interesting ideas but don't have a vehicle to actually take power any time in my lifetime.
John and then Brooke on that issue.
Well, Liberals have to confront the possibility that that may be the only role available to them that's of any relevance for some time. This is going to be one of the few televised discussions of the fate of the Liberal Party for the next long while. We're going to be somewhat obscure. And we've got to get to a place, and it's not realistic to expect people who've just been through grueling races to be in this place, but where it doesn't sting to be called marginal. Where you can actually, the way New Democrat friends of mine for years have been able to look me in the eye when I called them that and say that's no big thing as long as the ideas move. I think Liberals can and should, as they consider the models available to them, consider the British Liberal Party as an honorable model, that it is not a nightmare to go into. It may be required by circumstance. We should have an open mind about having institutional arrangements with others. I can't stand the tendency that says we cannot even talk about institutional realignments. I think that is just putting a clamp on debate, and for heaven's sakes, the Liberal Party, it may have been appropriate to clamp debates in the Liberal Party when we were in power or on the brink of it, but it's not appropriate in a third party. That makes no sense. Why would anyone stay in a third party where you're not even allowed to think out loud? There are so many habits of mind that are now absolutely obsolete, including the reflexive Quebec bridging, that are obsolete by circumstances in the contemporary Liberal environment. It will be incredibly painful to change them, and the Liberal Party will probably lose a lot of people in this process of changing the way that it operates and thinks. If it loses too many, actually, then de facto it will have gone out of existence.
Brooke,
and that's a scary scenario.
Brooke, let me read a quote to you from Michael Pitfield, who of course was at Mr. Trudeau's side for much of his time, senator once upon a time as well, who said, "The Liberal Party has no dogma. Its creed is unity, national unity, and party unity. And of course, this is a party that always did well in power, not so well out of power." What's happened to that creed, Brooke?
Well, you know, there's so many things I'd like to say about what both John and Jeffrey have said, and I hope I get a chance to do that. I'll start with this, though. I think the obvious problem here is that a party not in power has fewer carrots and sticks, of course, but also you had this debate that I've discussed before between the Trudeau version of reality and the Martin version of reality, which didn't get resolved and eventually came out in full public view during the last few years of the Chrétien regime. Having said that, though, I really want to turn to something optimistic here, because I'm not at all in agreement with the notion that the Liberal Party is going to be marginalized, that it's becoming some obscure or rather eccentric minimal player. And I think also that I don't agree with what John has said about the notion that there are no values. I'm definitely agree with Carolyn that there are many specific Liberal values.
I don't think he said that.
Carolyn didn't say that the Liberal Party had values?
Oh, John.
No.
John?
We all think the Liberal Party
Yeah.
has
That's
value.
I don't think, I don't think anybody said
all right,
that here.
sorry,
Forget about that.
sorry, I misunderstood then. But it's important to note that the Liberal Party is not simply the mushy middle. The Liberal Party is a position on the spectrum, whether you like to call it left or right or not. There are polarized views on the right and left, and the Liberal Party historically was where most Canadians were. And actually, Jeffrey Simpson has written several columns talking about how the party, the Conservative government may be on the right, but Canadians aren't. Canadians haven't really moved. They're basically in the same place on a lot of fundamental issues. So coming back to the notion of where the party goes in the future, I don't think it's irrelevant to look at the past. In 1984, the party was viewed as done like dinner. My colleagues in academia were writing that it was finished, and 9 years later, Jean Chrétien came back with a majority government. People said the same thing in 1917. You know, there are so many possibilities here for the Liberal Party to rebuild. Quebec is wide open. I don't think that it's inappropriate for Liberals to think about how they can, in fact, represent Quebec to Canada and Canada to Quebec. But more importantly, as Mr. Trudeau used to say, this is a country that's distinct in itself, not just a distinct society in Quebec. The Liberal approach of pan-Canadian vision, certainly they need new vision. They need new ideas. I agree entirely about that. They have to use those values as the fundamental building block and then create new programs, new policies, new ideas for the country, which reflect that. And I don't see somebody telling people that they can't think about something. I don't know where that comes from as an idea. I certainly think that Liberals have to engage in serious policy debate, which they haven't done now, and that's certainly a point about why they didn't do well in this election as well. You know, with the rapid change in leadership over the last 7, 8 years, there hasn't been a decent set of policy discussions, which Liberals usually have when they renew themselves through leadership change. And as a result, they weren't prepared. They might have had a good platform in this election, but it wasn't based on an overarching vision, and I agree, it was much too limited in its scope.
Carolyn Bennett.
The party is the piece that's just driving us crazy in terms of who is the party. The party are the members, and somehow decisions get made on behalf of the party without including the members. And so the fights riding by riding between the Chrétien Martin people were totally destructive. And we've got to go back and rebuild bottom up. Governor Dean came to our convention and talked about a 50-state solution. We need a 308 solution. We need to start listening bottom up. And I mean, during the Change Commission, I mean, it was sort of Darwin meets Einstein. Doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for better results is insane. And Darwin says that it's not the strongest, not the most intelligent, but the most able to change that actually will win. And we have got to go back and start looking at ourselves and saying that this triumphalism of just waiting it out till Canadians come to their senses and re-elect us won't work, and that we've got to listen to these heartfelt Liberals across the country who don't want to be a potted plant at a rally anymore. Well, they actually want to be heard.
Let me put on the table what I suspect Liberals all across the country are talking about today. And Mr. Ignatieff, in his resignation news conference yesterday, said he didn't think it was the future of the party, and he didn't like the idea. But lots of folks out there are talking about it. So let's, including a guy who ran for the leadership last time. Michael, we got this tape ready to go? Chapter 4, top of the page. Here's Bob Ray. Roll tape, please.
I don't think we want to start putting little barricades between the parties. I think we need to have a discussion about how we go forward. There is a simple and difficult fact, and that is that 40% of the Canadian people, or just under it, around it, have voted for Mr. Harper. 60% have not. And there's an awful lot, and there has been a lot of common ground between that 60%. Now, is there a willingness at this particular juncture to discuss what comes next? I can't tell. I think everybody's been a little skittish about having that discussion. My own view is that the dialogue needs to start with Canadians and with others. And it's not a backroom discussion. It's not a caucus discussion. It's not about a few people in a back room deciding what's going to happen one way or the other. It's really about all the political parties and their memberships and the broader Canadian public deciding how we should go forward.
Martha, they're called the Liberal Democrats in Great Britain. How do you like the sound of that over here?
Well, on this one, I will probably disagree with my colleague Bob. I will repeat what I said at the beginning of the show. that I think that most Canadians are people who appreciate economic responsibility, appreciate fiscal prudence, appreciate the values of competition, hard work, the market, but also understand that we want to use that prosperity for good. I actually don't.
Democrats would agree with that too.
I know, and that's my challenge with this whole left-right thing. It's not, and I'll take exception to what Carolyn was saying about Liberals in Alberta. When I lived in Alberta, there were an awful lot of people who felt the same way as I did about economics, about social issues, but would never call themselves Liberal. So when Carolyn is talking about the Liberals in Alberta, the 500,000 who vote Liberal, I actually look at all of the people in Alberta who feel very strongly about those centrist, that progressive centrist aspect of not politics, but where they want to see the country go. And I think there is a difference. We saw a reaction 2 days ago that was very much based on not policy. You know, and Brooke says the Liberal Party has to go back and do another policy convention. For gosh sakes, we have spent ages going around and around and around talking about policy. We had a wonderful conference in Montreal last year that was excellent in terms of policy. Our policy platform was excellent this time. I don't know what policy platform the Conservatives actually had. I don't think this time there was a reaction against Liberal policies. I think there was a reaction against not seeing the Liberal Party as the party to implement those basic values that we are agreeing that we have. I think we have to stop being timid. We have to be able to say, this is where we stand for. Stop harping on the label Liberal. I'm proud to be a Liberal, don't get me wrong. But if we continue to say, how do we bring back Liberal, as opposed to how do we make the Liberal Party adequately reflect what I think is the majority of Canadians and have them believe that we are in fact the people who can do it, I guarantee in a few months there are going to be a number of people, and certainly after 4 years there are going to be a lot of people who say, we're not sure that the NDP is actually the party to adequately reflect that combination.
Okay,
and we'll say the same thing about the Conservatives.
Let's go around the table on this. Jeffrey Simpson, let me get you on this. The 60% of people who didn't vote for Stephen Harper. Bob Ray says it's time to have a conversation about putting that into a more formal, singular alliance. What do you think?
Well, I think you can have a conversation about it. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there are still some quite fundamental differences between the NDP and the Liberal Party, as I've understood both of them over the years. Now, another defeat may cause everybody to take another look at it. I think it's going to take one more election, and we'll see. But what do I mean by fundamental differences? I mean this. First of all, the NDP have generic links with the trade union leadership in the country. The Liberal Party does not. Secondly, the New Democratic Party historically has been far more, how do I put this charitably, skeptical about the United States than the Liberal Party has. Thirdly, the Liberal Party, although it's wavered on this over the years, essentially has been a free trade party, whereas the New Democratic Party is not a free trade party. Lastly, and very, very critically, the New Democratic Party is still very skeptical of the free market, whereas the Liberal Party is principally not. And why do I say that? When Jack Layton was elected leader of the party, he put out a book, one of those Where I Stand books. I'll never forget this. I took it with me on the plane going out to Western Canada, and I had a yellow marker because I wanted to underline all the things he said about the market, which I thought were going to be positive. My pen, or my yellow marker, never got used. So there's a deep suspicion of elements of the free market in the New Democratic Party. Now, having said all that, we shall now see, and this is going to be one of the great unfolding dramas of the next 4 years, whether wearing the mantle and the responsibility of being the official opposition, as opposed to being a third party where you can say almost anything, will in fact change the New Democratic Party and turn it more, because the federal NDP is very, very different than some of the provincial NDP parties, as in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where they've been in power, where they've had to make trade-offs, where they've had to balance budgets, where they've had to make compromises. We'll see whether the federal New Democratic Party can evolve into those kinds of parties. And if it can, then I think the Liberal Party is going to have a great deal of difficulty as a centrist party, because the other side of the equation is Stephen Harper. You may choose to demonize him, and it's true that 60% of the public didn't vote for his party, but he's no fool. And he knows that whereas he has right-wing elements and he has to satisfy them from time to time, he knows that the vast majority of the Canadian people are somewhere in what we might loosely call the middle of the spectrum. And he's going to keep his eye on those voters. And he has since he got elected. So to some extent, the Liberals' future is dependent upon the maturation or otherwise of the New Democratic Party, and the Conservative Party keeping their eye on the center of the political spectrum.
I wonder, John, if part of the problem now is that the Liberals never entertained this idea in the past because they were always, of course, the senior partner in this potential arrangement. Now the New Democrats would be the senior partner in this potential arrangement, so why should they consider it?
If. I mean, the reality is, right now, there are many people in the Liberal Party who treat it as a heretical remark to even want to have the conversation. So we're a long way from doing design.
Right. You're not one of them, right? You think it's time.
I'm obviously open to the conversation. I think it's going to happen whether the institutional apparatus of the Liberal Party wants it to or not. It would be another one of those typical Liberal flaws if we closed ourselves to a discussion that was going on around us and pretended just because we weren't talking about it, it isn't happening. Another typical Liberal flaw would be to sit and hope that the NDP will be stupid in the opposite direction from what Jeff is describing. The corollary, what the classic Liberal mistake in opposition, we just executed it yet again, is all we have to do is let the government be bad and then we win, right? It's easy. Because, the Conservatives are a bunch of bigots, right? And they are racists and they offend people and they're in the pocket of big business. And we get very surprised when they don't act like that and are actually smart and win. Well, we're all expecting the NDP to be crazy, incompetent, immature, a bunch of, mad-eyed separatists, and totally unable to grow up into the role that Jeff is describing that they want to. And right now, that's Jack Layton's job number one. I have every reason to believe he knows that that's his principal assignment. If all the Liberals do is another version of what we've always done, which is wait for the NDP to be stupid, then we're going to miss yet another opportunity. At that point, we really are in the scenario where we will have done nothing with our time in defeat. We've got 4 years, have asked no basic questions about ourselves, cut ourselves off from any intelligent discussion, done nothing to connect people to ourselves in an idea way and in a principled way that might withstand the exit of the power brokers, and we'll have wasted being in a third party. You can get away with wasting a term in government. Lord knows we've done it. You can get away with a term in opposition wasted. It's very hard to get away for very long with wasting time in third party without actually everybody leaving and turning out the lights. We have to really fight to stay alive here and be honest with ourselves and not just waste more opportunities like we've been doing.
So, Carolyn, are you open to merging with the New Democratic Party?
I'm a long way from that right now. I'm fighting against thinking that choosing another leader, Messiah thing is actually going to fix us. So, I think this leaderitis business has also got us into terrible trouble, and that we need to engage the grassroots of the party. We can't be doing anything without listening to them about what it's like on the ground in their ridings, riding by riding by riding. We need a more formal association with past candidates. We never listen to them. We just discard them like some disposable something or other when they.
And we do that with our activists as well. Long-term activism in the Liberal Party has been a barrier to advancement in the Liberal Party.
Well, do you want to give us a hint, Carolyn, about, because you're going to Ottawa on Wednesday, right? You are too. You guys.
Yeah, but in my case, only temporarily to clean up.
I understand that. I understand. But defeated candidates and successful candidates are going to have a meeting and going to. What's going to happen in that conversation?
Well, I hope we're going to build some structure for how the shadow caucus takes place. We've got caucus, we've got previous MPs, and we've got amazing past candidates. And I hope we'll figure out how we will begin to listen to them as well. I think people like me have been saying for a long time, if we don't listen to the unheld ridings, we can just keep booking a smaller and smaller caucus room, which is what we just seem to have done.
But do you think some of this will come up in the conversation?
I sure hope so. We then have the reality of the Constitution. So there will be an interim leader picked next week. But then
who's going to be?
I don't know.
Who are you going to vote for?
I don't know.
Come on, you know who you're going to vote for.
It depends on who
are you going to vote for?
Well, it depends on who says they want the job.
But one of the problems, Steve, is I think there are a lot of people in the party who are worried what it says in the Constitution. The National Executive has to meet within 27 days, and then we've got to have a leadership convention within 5 months. And a lot of people think that's
crazy.
Here we go, civil war again. And I guess it's a matter of whether it's subterranean or on the surface, I guess. But I mean, the reason we began the work of the Change Commission was to try and get this grassroots stuff properly mechanized. But it's, I think that upsets me.
Let me get Brooke on this. Does this party, given some of the much larger existential conversations we've been having today that many of you think the party needs to have, is it smart to jump into a new leadership fight almost instantly?
Well, absolutely not. I've been saying this. I was aware of this constitutional issue as well, and I've been saying this all along. This is putting the cart before the horse. You know, in 1984, John Turner was picked because of his presumed winnability, and it was only after the fact that people discovered that he thought Meech Lake was a fine idea. You know, and in some respects, I think the same thing can be said about Paul Martin, that people didn't pay attention to what he thought on some issues until after the fact, and it cost them. So obviously, you want to do the policy development first before you pick a leader who you then know matches the values and beliefs that have been converted into policy through discussion from the grassroots up. I completely agree with all of this. The need for policy debate comes first. What I would like to address, however, is this issue of the NDP again. I'm definitely in agreement with those who say that there are significant differences between the two parties, that the Liberals have always represented the center of the spectrum, and that as the NDP is now constituted, if Canadians had understood, if they'd known about the constitution of that party or the resolutions passed in conventions, they would have been very surprised. I think it's quite clear they have voted for Jack Layton faute de mieux. They have seen it as a leadership issue rather than a party and platform issue. And there's lots of time here. Liberals don't need to be stampeded into creating a set of platforms immediately or a leader immediately. They've got time to do the job properly this time and to create and reestablish the Liberal brand. And that's what they should be doing rather than talking about a merger.
So let me ask the bigger question then, Jeffrey, which is in a hyper-partisan culture, which I guess most of us think we're in right now, where conservatives occupy, you know, mostly right but occasionally tacking to the center, and New Democrats stake out the left and occasionally tack to the center. Is there still a place for a moderate centrist party in Canadian politics?
We shall see. First of all, I agree that look, leaders count, right? I mean, we live in a television age and leaders count, but the Liberals would make a huge mistake if they jumped into a leadership campaign. I don't know how they get around their constitution. That's for party members to decide. But there's no reason they should have a new leader within 18 months or even 24 months. They would need first they need a generational change. And there are some younger Liberals, MPs, who might be suitable leadership candidates.
Jeffrey, Bob Ray just threw a brick through his television set when you said that. Because when everybody says we need generational change, that's code for Bob Ray, your time is past.
No, well, I mean, let's talk about Bob if you want. That's not really what I had in mind. But Bob, if he were to become the leader, would be fighting the next election campaign at around the age 68. Now, I'm past 60, so I'm respecting people of that age. But you want to ask yourself, if you're any party, do you want to have a leader who's going to be 68 at the time of the next election campaign? And generically speaking, I'm not talking about Bob Ray here, I think that would probably not be what you'd want to do.
I think Ronald Reagan became president when he was 69.
Yes, I know, and Gladstone was prime minister when he was 146. I know all that. But generally speaking, that's not what a business wants to do, and a political party is a business. Now, having said that, we've just seen in the case of the Liberal Party, they chose two very fine people. They're both academics. I have a foot in a university, and my friend Brooke is there full time. Academics lecture. They teach. They don't talk to ordinary people. And both of these leaders had a crippling inability to talk to ordinary people in a way that ordinary people found credible. So the next leader of the party has got to be a pro who's willing to do what neither of these leaders were willing to do, which is to spend an enormous amount of time on the gritty, unglamorous, difficult work of organizing a political party and have a vocabulary and a way of speaking that ordinary folks can relate to.
Martha, you agree?
I'll just end with this.
Oh, all right.
Can I just end with this last point,
sure,
which is, if you want to be optimistic about the Liberal Party, you have to say the Liberal Party has to stand for big Canada, for big ideas. The Conservative Party has a set of ideas. They're perfectly legitimate ideas. They tend to be more minimalist. The New Democratic Party has a set of ideas. They tend to be rather ideological. Big Canadian projects is what the Liberal Party has always stood for, and which it largely has got away from over the last 20 or 30 years. If it has a future, it's got to be a party of big Canada.
I'm tempted to ask the 60-year-old Dr. Bennett whether she thinks she's too old to run for the leadership of the party again. And I should ask, I don't know how old you are, Martha Hull. Or no, I do know.
51 and a half, and proudly so.
Okay.
I've earned these.
Okay. Who's also run for the leadership in the past, whether either of you has any interest in doing it again. Carolyn, you first. Martha, you second.
Nope, but I'm very interested in building, helping build back the party. And I was very interested that Donald Savoy, as well as Tom Kent, think that we need to build an institution around the Liberal Party. We've got 4 years now that would be a policy think tank that you could get the green papers and the white papers and cost ideas and get evidence for and against resolutions. We have the ability to create a really exciting institution in the Liberal Party, like the Democratic Institute. There's a blank slate now, and we need to get Liberals something to be proud of.
Okay, Martha Hull Findlay, you thinking about it?
Well, I just want to actually say, I mean, you can talk about age, but Carolyn Bennett's one of the hardest working people I've ever met, one of the hardest working MPs, and I'm really, really glad to see her back because the party needs people like Carolyn. For me, I'll go back to this comment again about policy. We had fabulous policy in this campaign. We had outstanding
Martha, you're dodging
policy.
my question here. You're gonna get the big red bus back in business?
But we all need to understand that what we need going forward as a party are people. And I will say people, not one person, because this whole Messiah thing has been, I'll repeat what Carolyn said, has been just a huge difficulty for the party. So whatever we do, whether it's soon, whether it's in 2 years, we need people who can actually translate what the Liberal Party stands for in a way that people on the ground can understand. We don't need to, damn right, in the sense that I didn't get into politics so that I could be an MP for 3 years and then disappear. I feel really strongly about this country. I feel really strongly about this party. And I am so frustrated that with all of this great policy, we have great policy. The challenge we have now is in translating that into people on the ground. As Jeffrey has said, you need people you need a party that people feel represents them.
Sure.
And that means communication on the ground, working with people on the ground. So we need a few people.
So let me ask a nutty question here. Okay, you're not an academic, right? Jeffrey Simpson said the next leader of the Liberal Party should not be an academic, having gone 0 for 2 with academics, Stefanzio and Michael Ignatieff. You got any interest?
None whatever. I have a day job and I have a little family and I rather like all of those things. I will say this, what is of interest to me and what should I think be of interest to everyone is not letting leadership politics gum up the works here of something very basic.
Exactly.
Isn't that inevitable if you go to a leadership convention within the next 6 months?
Jeff and
will in 2
Carolyn and
years,
Martha
too.
are making an excellent point about that. Again, I'm agnostic. It's only been 2 days and no one saw this thing really happening. No one's got a game plan. I want to clear up the point about policy, though, because this is really important. Yes, we had excellent policy in the sense of a platform and a set of costed proposals for governing. That's throne speech stuff. It's budget stuff. It is not a political proposition. The Liberals lack a political proposition, and I see Brooke and I agreeing, which means we're either in very dangerous territory. I might actually be onto something for once in my life. The Liberals have come unmoored from the core political propositions that they were identified with in the same period of time during which we've come unmoored from the core groups of people, the core large groups of bodies, the big battalions like Multicultural Canada or Francophone Quebec. We are unmoored in both areas. I don't think that we can instantly reattach to those large groups of people because we're a third party and large groups of people don't say, oh, they can help me. So I don't think it's going to be a brokerage reattachment. I think you have to start with building it around ideas, even if that means you're going to run the risk, not the certainty, but the risk of winding up like the British LDP. Once you've got a core proposition of what you stand for that is not negotiable and that no one else can contest, that isn't owned by somebody else and it's not something you deal away, then you've got something that you can start to rally people around.
How long
I would like to have the conversation about what is liberal, that is proper to the Liberals, that only the Liberals believe in, and what the Liberals will go to the wall for, including going out of business if nobody else agrees with it.
Is that a
That's where you start.
Is that a decade-long proposition?
It takes a long time. Building brand consistency, you know, Brooke's right, the way that, you know the story, The Giving Tree, there's a little boy who grows up and he uses a tree to make a wagon. Then he gets older, he uses the tree to make a car. Then he gets older, he uses the tree to make a house. By the end of it, the tree is, he's an old guy and he's sitting there and there's nothing left of the tree but the stump, and he still loves the tree and this tree still loves him. What has been done to the Liberal Party by a lot of people, and I bear a share of responsibility in this, has been to treat it like the living tree and to assume that it would always be there, our constituencies would always be there. We have to nurture this thing again and start actually rebuilding it, not take it a different direction or turn it into a boat or try to build a house out of it, try to come up with something crazy and new. Slowly nurture it, say the same thing for many elections to the same people for a long time. Jack Layton has taken 3 elections to get Quebecers to even listen to him. Yep. This takes patience. It takes new people who are going to be around for a long time, which is the point Jeff's making. It takes a lot of different ways of doing than we've done. It's going to take a great renewal. Having said that, and we got about 2 minutes to go here, Brooke, let me bring you in on this. If it is a decade-long proposition, and if there is a generational issue here, as Jeffrey Simpson says, and also as Jeffrey said, you know, leadership can change everything. You get a great leader, and you can, you know, you might be able to short-circuit some of this or make it happen faster. Who's out there right now that fits the bill? Brooke.
Well, I don't think we know that. I think that's the whole point. We shouldn't know it at this point. We should be talking about the party and the values and the policies, as John has said, and then have a leadership convention, and we'll see who comes forward. It doesn't have to be someone who's an MP, or it may be. Certainly it should be a generational change, but, you know, it may be time for a woman. It may be time from someone from Western Canada, which is an area that we definitely need to rebuild. I don't think we know who that person is yet.
Jeffrey? You know, Michael Ignatieff said in his departure news conference yesterday that he hopes some young person, preferably a woman, will look at him and say, that guy didn't get there this time, but maybe I can. Is that person out there?
Gosh, that wouldn't be a very good role model, would it, given the results of Monday night? And I admire Mr. Ignatieff, so I'm not being snide. I don't know if there's somebody outside the political process right now who might be interested. I just don't know that. Inside the party, I mean, Justin Trudeau, I don't think he's going to run. He's got young children, certainly has a magnetic name. Dominique Leblanc, I'd put my money on right now, from, you know, a historic Liberal name from New Brunswick, perfectly bilingual, but there'll be other candidates, I'm sure. But I think it's just too early. I go back to my point. I'm not a Liberal. I won't be part of this process. I'll be over in my usual, over on the sidelines positioning. But, you know,
30 seconds left, Jeffrey.
Parties, even in their worst moments, have to be true to what they think they exist for. And the Liberal Party has to stand for a strong central government and for big Canada. And if I were them, tactically, what I would do is I'd introduce a motion early in this Parliament saying that they reaffirm the Official Languages Act across the country, including for federal institutions in Quebec. And I'd put Mr. Layton on the spot, who's now bought into Mr. Mulclair's view that Bill 101 should trump the Official Languages Act. Those are the kind of issues that Liberals would feel good about and make the NDP squirm.
Okay. Thanks for your time, everybody. As an outsider, indeed, from the sidelines. Brooke Jeffrey and Jeffrey Simpson, good of you to be there for us on the line from the nation's capital, here in our Toronto studios. John Duffy in the middle, surrounded by Carolyn Bennett on the left and Martha Hall-Finley on the right. And Martha Hall-Finley, good luck with whatever comes next for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.